Welcome to the C Word, the Conservatives podcast. Today we're talking about smut. I'm Jenny Mathiasen, an Objects Conservator based in South Yorkshire.
I'm Chloe Ramsey, an Objects Conservative based in Greater Manchester.
And I'm Christina Rizek, an Objects Conservator based in Cambridgeshire.
Welcome to the show.
Well.
Yes, quite. So what do we mean by smut, people? I kind of define this as anything that will make people blush. This is our not safe for work episode. No, it's fine. It's fine. Obviously, it's fine. We're not going to show you anything. This is an audio-only medium. But if you're prone to blushing, maybe just, put headphones in.
Yeah.
Just put headphones in. No one will know. You don't have to tell.
So we came up with this episode topic. I can't remember what. So when we talk about episode topics, there's usually like a thing that we see or something that makes us kind of think, oh my God, that'd be an amazing topic. I can't remember what this one was, but I remember the conversation.
I think, and I could be wrong, that I just got excited about your dad's art. So that might need a little bit of clarification. Chloe's dad is an artist.
He is an artist, and Paul Ramsey, look him up, follow his Facebook page because I run it.
Put a link in the show notes.
And one of his series of drawings is based basically around the concept of masculinity and phallic symbols being representative and visible in all parts of society and imagery, and like a phallus instead of a gun type, that sort of thing.
Or instead of a head.
Instead of it, yeah. So from that, we started thinking about, God, there's loads of things that just aren't taken seriously in society because they are related to sex in some way. And then we realised, obviously, usually we'll have a friend or have had an experience ourselves where, as conservators, we've had a slightly risqué object to conserve. And the number of times that I've heard, oh yes, I conserved this object and I was in the news about it, is just really surprising. So we got thinking basically about sex in collections and the risqué objects, and what that means for the object and the preservation of that object. So that's the context of what we're talking about today and how we came up with this idea. I don't know how much giggling we'll have, like maybe 20% giggling.
Yeah, probably. And feel free to giggle along. That's all right. That's all right. It's a safe space.
I think when in our chat about it last week, in our kind of pre-episode planning chat, we kind of established that probably Chloe and I were going to giggle a lot more being British and therefore probably quite prudish, whereas Jenny is a sensible Swede who's probably got a slightly more grown-up approach to these things.
Oh, you say that, but I assimilate well. Ladies, have any of you worked on anything that's a little bit on the smutty side?
I haven't.
Yes.
Oh, well, I will say I haven't first.
Okay.
Shortest answer. The closest thing, other than Dad's work and talking about like the representation of sex in art and stuff, which is a fairly normal Ramsey round the table conversation.
Yeah.
The only thing that I really know of is the when I was working in the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, there was was it the dick part that people referred to?
Oh yes, there's a penis part.
Yeah, it's basically
that everyone loves.
Yeah.
Yes. It's very prominently displayed right in the kind of entrance area.
It is.
So you kind of, it's straight up there.
Yeah.
Hi, it's a penis pot.
It's Roman, I want to say. Yeah, and people basically just walk in and look at it and go and walk out again, which is an interesting attitude to not only how people consume museum media, but also visitor numbers and how many of the visitors.
If you look just at the penis pot.
If you were to look at a Linger model or whatever they're called, I can't remember.
Oh yeah.
Then I think that's probably in red. And actually, as I was speaking, I do now remember that I have decanted. I was part of the team to decant the medicine galleries and the Science Museum. And obviously, sexual medicine was quite a big part of it, and contraception, birth control aspects, that sort of thing, but nothing kind of full on really.
Interesting. Although I do remember, and in that Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, that you and I were in the store once and we found an excellent box. Do you remember what that box said?
I remember finding the box. I remember giggling. I don't remember what it said.
Oh, excellent. I have a picture somewhere, Chloe, next to the box, because I was so delighted to find this. A box that just says artificial breasts for men.
That's it. I remember.
Which is the most astonishing box. And I wish I'd opened it, but I was kind of doing something else, and I just appreciate the label.
I imagine it's a sort of ceremonial.
Something maybe for dancing, that sort of thing. But like, oh my God, I want to go back and just look in that box.
What about you, Jenny?
So I was going to say, I think the smuttiest thing I've worked on directly would be an ancient Egyptian model of a plow, but it's in the shape of a penis, like a really, 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 really long penis.
Standard.
So it's about fertilizing the soil, which is, beautiful.
Symbolic.
Beautiful. Also, the strangest thing ever that was handed as an intern. Here, have this. Thanks. So yeah, I think that's probably the smuttiest object I've worked on. How about you, Christina?
Yeah, quite a lot. I mean, I've handled my fair share of penises and breasts in the course of work, just because I spent, I think, about 4 years working on antiquities and then a couple of years working on anthropological things as well. Both of those tend to feature naked people, so it's kind of unavoidable. Well, so funny that you should mention that conservators often get in the papers after working on these kinds of objects.
I wonder why I said that.
I did. And in fact, I was interviewed for an article headlined "Penises and Caustic Soda," which
that sounds like a brilliant combination.
Worthy combination. And we can put a link to that in the show notes. But that was because I'd worked on a kylix, an ancient Greek drinking cup, which was collected by a pair of collectors who donated their antiquities collection to the Fitzwilliam Museum subsequently. And they were both artists as well. And they were known to have done some of the restoration on their own objects. And I got interested in this one really because I was looking at a 1930s catalogue of these ceramics. And one of the entry for this cup just said kylix, red figure, blah, blah, blah. Genitals restored by Ricketts being the then owner. So I was like, okay, there's a story there. So I had a look at the cup and sure enough, someone has drawn the penis on. I don't know what's underneath the overpaint because we didn't remove it. And the overpaint is itself now quite discoloured. So there's a kind of slightly dirty looking splodge over this guy's crotch with a penis drawn on. And I don't know whether the original was lost underneath and has been abraded and lost and they felt it was important to replace it, or whether there was some kind of cosmetic procedure going on there and they just decided to adjust it or what. And the whole thing is slightly baffling. And I actually went to the British Library and went through Ricketts and Shannon's diaries to see if I could find out anything more about this. And I never got to the bottom of it, disappointingly, but it is on display. We decided not to remove the overpaint, partly because it was almost certainly, if this catalogue is believed, done by the collector, one of the collectors who was himself a significant artist, and there's no particularly compelling reason to remove it.
Yeah.
But it was kind of felt to be newsworthy enough to make it into the Guardian, so...
I think it's interesting that we do so much kind of almost more interesting work on objects just day to day, and it's just you cleaning a pot that got into the news just because it had a willy on it. I mean, obviously, it's very interesting work.
Well, not just because it had a willy on it. I mean, because there's this whole kind of mystery about why was the willy overpainted and none of the rest of it. And I mean, who did it and why. And,
Okay.
I also feel like there's an aspect of this sort of thing coming into the news every now and then, like, penises being chopped off classical statues and stuff, and people going, oh, we found the willy, we put it back on. I feel like that sort of thing does make it into media every now and then, just as a kind of like, oh, look, they're putting the penis back on.
It's different to, say, an arm, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But so what kind of erotica and things like that can we find in collections? What kind of smutty things are hiding in our collections?
There's so much.
Because it doesn't have to be a dedicated sex collection. Like,
no.
Those exist as well.
I'm currently working in an anthropology museum. So there's tons and tons of naked figures and ceremonial things and penises and so on.
And fertility symbols, that sort of thing.
So we've got loads of things, haven't we? And things that you wouldn't really necessarily consider as being part of sex and collections. So the thing that really interests me is photography, because there's that old joke, isn't there, that you got photography as a technology, and then instantly people started making porn, like immediately. And my main interest for this is people's attitudes to it and how that's affected its preservation, because you've got, you know, like the first photograph of Manchester or whatever it is that people have kept, and they've gone, oh, this is really important. But you could have...
Did they keep the first nude?
Yeah, exactly. Have you got this stuff? Was it kept? Was it hidden? Did attitudes to pornography change since it was taken?
But also, I suppose it's about what we put in the word pornography. So is that any nude? Because arguably we don't treat nude art, like fine art, as outright pornography. We're quite happy to have that on our walls and our galleries, including, you know, even if you're like, you know, describing yourself as a very family-friendly museum, you still got nude people on the walls. And
I suppose it's
very natural.
Part of a sexual nature, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd like to say only women. I do think that, I mean, there's art historians have written an awful lot about the male gaze, Gaze, and the way that the history of fine art basically makes it acceptable for people to look at women's bodies.
Yes.
And I do think that with the possible exception of classical sculpture and Renaissance sculpture, generally we're talking about naked women on the walls being acceptable.
That is true.
There aren't a lot of dicks on the walls.
No, that's true. You don't get enough penises on the walls.
What a sentence. And it is interesting to note, actually, that I think, now I might be wrong, Victorian era-ish, you needed an excuse to paint boobies, and it tended to be that excuse was, this is a representation of a historical woman or something, like this is a painting of Cleopatra reclined, and we're allowed to get her breasts out because she's a history.
Yeah, quite. I would follow that up with that you do see male nudity in terms of classical statues and stuff like that, but beyond that you don't really see it.
No,
not so much. But essentially when it's art or arty, we just kind of accept it. Then it's a nude.
Then it's a nude, and it's not porn. But then you've got things like the Tracy Emin drawings that they're nudes, but they're of a sexual nature. And I say Tracy Emin just because that's the thing that immediately jumped into my mind. There will be so many others, of course.
I was going to say, so museums have always collected this stuff. And one of the things I sort of unearthed while researching for this episode was cupboard 55 at the British Museum.
Oh, yes, I've heard of this.
I don't know if you've come across that.
No, I haven't.
I've heard of it, not seen
it. Which is also called the Secretum. And I think, to be fair, cupboard 55 no longer actually contains their secret porn collection, but they used to have a separate cupboard for this stuff. It used to be collected but kept separately from the rest of the collection.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I've found an article about it. Dr. Witt, the collector, the guy who presented this collection to the museum, it says his obsessive interest was in what he called symbols of the early worship of mankind. So we're already going into some sort of euphemism there, but not in just any symbol. For the mayor was a specialist. He collected across the centuries and the continents every representation of the phallus, which is a posh way of saying the erect penis, that he could get his hands on. Assyrian dicks, Egyptian dicks, Greek and Roman dicks, medieval dicks, dicks with wings, dicks with eyes, dicks with hawks' heads. Boxes upon boxes in cupboard 55 contain wax dicks, lead dicks, dicks in the form of signet rings, lamps, brooches, and so on. So,
that's one hell of an article.
It's again, we could put a link to it in the
absolutely, we will.
Show. It's from the Daily Telegraph, bizarrely. But they collected this stuff, and as I said, it had this kind of academic veneer, but I think there was probably quite a lot of prurience there as well. And they used to sort of screen the people who could actually get access to this.
Oh, yes. That was a very
you're not going to
common
let anyone
thing.
into your cupboard of dicks.
Yes.
And that's really interesting, isn't it? Because obviously there was the antiquarianism collections, but there is obviously, because of society's attitudes and our own personal attitudes, there is a specific kind of set of reasons why people collect stuff.
Yeah, of course. That's true of everything. But then I'm interested in this notion of gatekeeping, that not everyone is allowed to see this. You kind of have to be invited in to see the penises, and that's a really funny thing. But it's also very common. Like a lot of museums who have, what they might have once considered very sordid collections would, screen who is allowed to see it.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure what they're screening for, because can you tell what someone's motivations are for seeing a collection just by looking at them?
No. And I suppose nowadays we have, we don't not show these things, but we do have the sign on the wall that says, around this wall, there you will find some images of a sexual nature, blah, 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 blah. But
Yes, that's
considered offensive. So at the moment, we've got the warnings.
I also found an article about a British Museum exhibition from 2013.
Yeah.
And it says the British Museum will open an exhibition of sex in Japan later this year. I think the exhibition is about sex in Japan, not it's an exhibition of sex in Japan, which will include explicit paintings and illustrations. And they actually took the decision to restrict the entrance to the exhibition to over 16s. Partly because of that recognition that they need to be kind of,
Yeah, I can see that choice being made.
Was that the prince? Japanese prince?
Yes, I think so.
Eroticism, because I saw loads of adverts from that, and I thought, that'd be brilliant to go to. And
they've made it.
I never made it, unfortunately. Yeah. London is expensive.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
So what it said is that children under 16 will have to, they did let in people under 16, but they would have to be accompanied by an adult. And parents with children
so
under
like
14
a cinema approach, really.
That the show contains explicit material. Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of up to the parents to decide whether they're going to let their children see this kind of stuff or not.
That's quite a good even-handed attitude, really, isn't it?
And of course,
that's probably the mature approach.
Yeah, it is, because, they're a public museum. They're a national museum. They're funded by everybody. They need to make their exhibitions open to everybody in some sense as well.
Yeah,
it's not a secret, is it, either, if that's what the title of your exhibition is, basically?
Well, yeah, that's also that.
It's not like people are going to sort of stroll in and go, oh my God, I'm so offended.
So that kind of covers art in collections, I feel.
Well, I've got a couple of examples, actually, of a couple of museums. Actually, you have a really nice list of the different, or where there are sex museums around the world. Yeah, and I'll go into a couple of examples I've looked
I
up.
thought it was interesting. Right, so apparently sex museums were quite popular in the 60s and 70s because, the Great Sexual Revolution and all that, right? So then these things started cropping up, and then they kind of had a revival in the 90s where they were then renamed erotica museums. But a lot of them have closed and that sort of thing, but there are at least 4 in America, about 10 or so in Europe, probably 3 or so in Asia, and there used to be one in Australia. So they are around, like dedicated museums to erotic art or erotic collections. But there does seem to be an awful lot of them popping up and then closing again, which I think you did a little bit of reading on, Chloe.
Yeah, so what I wanted to have a look at, because the ones that I've heard of particularly are the Museum of Eroticism in Paris. And I heard about that one just from my parents, because obviously with the artwork connection, they wanted to, they go to Paris a lot because they have galleries there, a gallery not owning, obviously. They show work at a gallery. And because of the subject matter, it's an interesting museum because it claims to be focused on art collections, so eroticism in art, and it was founded in 1997, so matches our 90s thing, and it was closed in 2016. The reason for that is considered to be the drop in interest due to terror attacks, and that's from
Paris did suffer from a lot of that.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that's from the voice of one of the owners or the ex-owners. So as a description of what they've got, it's erotic art in part as a collection from the two owners, built over decades, and also a floor on the legal brothels in the 19th and 20th century in Paris, closed just after the First World War, and then a couple of floors for changing exhibition spaces for contemporary artists. And that got me interested, obviously, because now it's closed. There's no longer a kind of platform for artists in Paris to explicitly show erotic art. So I don't know. I wonder how that's changed, or how that's changed the art scene in Paris, and whether just other outlets have emerged.
Or is it just that we're kind of stepping back and, in fact, it's now condemned to not being seen? Yeah,
maybe,
Is that now being a hidden thing instead?
Yeah. So I've looked at the reviews for this on TripAdvisor, and they just vary. Obviously, all TripAdvisor reviews vary loads. But one is, as an example, sex is the same all around the world. Which I thought was a really nice one. Though another one then said sex is different all around the world. So I think it depends on your outlook and what you're expecting as well. The one that I found most interesting in my little look was not really a legit museum, next to strip clubs, sex shops and hookers. And I find that really interesting because what does a real museum mean? Is that this individual's attitude to sex or sex collections? Or is it the way that the museum was laid out? Or is it the context of the museum? Because, you know, when we were talking about this just before we started recording, Jenny, we were thinking, well...
That's just kind of in its natural environment. Then it's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, is it just the expectation that museums are elevated and they need to be in a very clean kind of, you know, like in the perfect little
clean
niche.
And classy. And then what does that mean about people's attitudes to sex and to sex collections? So I thought that was really interesting. And the second one I looked up, these two weren't scientifically chosen, by the way. I looked up the one in Paris because I'd heard of it, and I looked up the one in Amsterdam, the Temple of Venus, because the number of people on, for example, just my Facebook feed that you hear that they're going to Amsterdam, and then you see photos of them in front of the big red letters, and then next to the big penis in the sex museum. It seems like that's, you know,
those are the things.
Those are the things you go and do. So it opened in 1985, and it was listed as one of the most visited museums, one of the most visited museums in the Netherlands in 2015. So that was interesting to me because 2015 is only a year before the one in Paris closed down.
Yeah, so interest was still high.
Yeah, interest still high, but it's difficult to know whether it is because of the people obviously still go to Paris, even though there were terror attacks. It's described as showing the evolution of sex through the ages and attitudes to sex through the ages. And the reviews for this are, again, really varying. One being would recommend for a laugh, which I found interesting because obviously we have kind of belittling attitudes to sex and sex collections and sex objects. As a society, it's like,
more,
lols.
Yeah, more the
dick.
jokey kind of approach to it, yeah.
I wonder if that has really affected how we, as the heritage industry, kind of behave towards sex objects and sex-related objects, I should say. But others say, another one says fun and informative, another says enlightening, and then back down to nothing but a joke. As another attitude. So obviously this has something to do with what people are expecting, but also maybe people's attitudes to these collections again, and maybe
So that's obviously for dedicated collections of a sexual nature. But I was gonna again kind of rein it back to the kind of stuff that we might find in our collections, and I was thinking something as simple as, I'm sure most places with a costume collection will have some underwear, and like some lingerie. I'm sure most places would have that. Might even display it, not necessarily in a sexy way, but more of a, this is what you would wear on your clothes.
Lace making in the 1800s.
Exactly. That sort of thing. And then I was thinking of something that we have in our collection, which I'm quite entertained by. It's the smuttiest thing I can think of in our collection, is calling cards for prostitutes. Because, frankly, soldiers used them a lot. So they collected their calling cards. But that's like, you know, evidence of the famously proclaimed oldest job.
Well, quite.
Yeah,
exactly.
oldest profession.
Exactly.
But yeah.
So that brings it, I think, we briefly touched on the internet just then, and this is a topic that is huge, and obviously the preservation of the internet and digital archiving and digital recording is one of those things that I feel like I just don't even slightly have the handle on in terms of how we're going to preserve this stuff, our attitudes to how our attitudes to this is going to change over time. But there's a huge amount of porn on the internet. Yeah. Like half of the internet is porn, as far as, you know, safe search goes.
There's a lot, and I'm unclear on who, if anyone should be collecting that and like how it should be.
But it's interesting because it says so much to us about people's attitudes to sex and people's attitudes to women and the body and everything. So if this stuff just disappears, then we could find ourselves in 50 years with a certain set of attitudes to how sex happens,
but nothing to back it up.
Nothing to back it up. No idea of how we got to that point.
I do find that interesting because I was reading a feminist book very recently, and it was all about this is the sort of thing that we see in porn these days, and this is how the author believed that affects how we think of ourselves as women. And essentially that's all well and good because I know what she's talking about, but someone reading that in 30 years time is not going to have any idea what she's on about because they don't know what porn in the early 2000s were like. Why would they? Because we probably haven't kept it.
there's a lot of evidence that exposure to norms of porn, if you like, have affected the way that younger people are now seeing their own sexuality and how they grow up and what they sort of view as normal or desirable and so on. And it's changed the way people feel about their own bodies in a very obvious way, and it's also changed what people feel they ought to be doing, and what they, it's had a hugely kind of it's fed back. It's not, porn is not just driven by people's desire for particular things and to see particular things. It's also feeding back into then how people behave and what they end up desiring and so on. And I wonder if that also is going to have an effect on how people then view things that were seen as erotic or smutty or whatever in the past, because we've kind of moved so far.
Exactly.
From,
But then I think
being turned on by a glimpse of someone's ankle or something like
that's true. I mean, that does seem a bit far-fetched in today's day and age, perhaps. But at the same time, that makes for such interesting conversations that we can have in museums and that we can have in these gallery spaces where we can talk about, well, why would this have been so erotic?
Yeah, exactly. Like, belly buttons.
Yeah, imagine a world where this is forbidden to you, completely forbidden, like... I just think there's so much scope for actually talking about these things and really examining them, which I think is a tremendous thing that we really ought to do.
Yeah.
Actually. I think you and I talked briefly about the possibility of a Playboy archive.
Yes. So again, as Chloe's famous anecdotes have absolutely no context, just a vague memory of what it was about and where it's from. But it is possible to download all of the front covers and or centerfolds, I can't quite remember, of Playboy magazine from its very first issue. It's not just, seeing naked women. It's also photography and modelling and attitudes to colour even, and fashion, and
how that's changed,
and how things like, for example, 1960s beautiful photographs, 1990s really, really bad, really awful. And obviously you've got the sort of attitudes to things like pubic hair and body shape and plastic surgery, but also sort of whether there's other people in the photo. Is it just a lone woman? Is there another woman? Are there men? It's just really, it really is an interesting and simple way of just looking at the way things have changed over time.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And that does make me think, is there anything that shame is, or the perception of shame is stopping us from collecting, do you think, as museums?
Oh, definitely, I'd say.
Yeah, because I suspect there's a lot of, that might be a bit... I'm not really sure how that fits into a collection policy. Please take this away, sir. I feel like there might be a little bit of that, but actually maybe we should make an effort.
Well, interestingly, one of the other things I wanted to talk about was libraries, and specifically copyright libraries who collect everything printed in the UK, including pornographic texts, basically. The library at my university when I was a student is in an immensely phallic building. It's got a gigantic great tower sticking up out of two side wings. You can see it from quite a long way, and it is hugely symbolic of all kinds of things. But when I was an undergraduate, there were persistent rumours that the tower was where they kept the porn collection.
Oh, I love it.
And I mean, also you can go into all kinds of symbolic things there as well. But anyway, so there were that was just one of those things that all undergraduates knew. If you go to the university library, there's a secret porn collection in the tower, and nobody's allowed in there. And there, every now and then, there'd be rumours about somebody who had been in there and had access to it. And then there were, lots of people sort of didn't really believe that there was that kind of stuff in the university library. So a few years ago, the university actually had a sort of PR effort to dispel these rumours.
Oh my God.
And say, yes, we do collect pornography, among our other things. We do have things that are considered to be scandalous or pornographic texts, but no, they're not kept in the tower. And I found an article about it in the student newspaper, which is quite interesting because it sort of says some of the things that are actually in the collections. And some of them are quite, it does sort of give you quite an interesting history of sexuality and changing attitudes to sex. So some of the earlier texts are things like Flirting Made Easy, a guide for girls, brackets illustrated.
How do you illustrate flirting?
Which includes most intriguingly named passages such as The Seaside and the Girls at It, or Cupboard Love and Policeman, or Rural Lovemaking.
This is amazing.
So, proffering detailed courtship advice to sensible, impulsive, and newly married young ladies, this guide suggests such saucy flirtation techniques as a gentle pause between questions, and far from titillating its readers through sexually explicit content, rather cautions against the world of deep, deep love and passion as rather too wild and weird. So,
oh, that's immense.
I wonder what there is with this archives as well. I wonder if there's an archive that focuses on collecting sexual texts.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I do also wonder if these people writing these erotic books have any notion that their work will be mandatory part of the collection of the depository libraries.
I want to ask a question about how people are collecting, saving, whatever, things that people have written online, because you've got so much.
Oh, that's a lot of erotic out there.
So much. Well, and not everything. Just so much everything out there. I mean,
quite.
It's overwhelming.
I suspect
famously, 50 Shades started as online fanfic.
Exactly. I suspect a lot of it isn't being collected, but maybe there should be an effort. I'm not really sure who that falls to, but I feel like at some point, I mean, archive.org will probably have some of this stuff just because that's the kind of purpose of it, for everything, not just smut. But it does make me think about things like unseen culture, like can anyone represent what a sex shop looked like in the 90s? Like, what's the experience of going in one? I wasn't in one in the 90s because I was a child, but but you know, like, does anyone like collect the kind of stuff that would have gone in it, or even can they even do a set dressing that looks a bit like it? I'm just curious to see kind of where people could go with this sort of thing, because it's an experience that could be exciting or embarrassing, or you know, it can evoke so many different emotions that I feel like that's kind of, there's exhibitions ideas just in that, like just trying to see how people react to this sort of thing.
That's a really interesting idea, because I think it comes back to that idea of responding to things in the same way as contemporaries would have done. So yes, you could recreate your 90s sex shop, but would visitors in 2018, would it evoke those sort of same responses? You can tell people how your typical visitor in the 1990s might have felt, but you know, things have moved on, and porn has just pushed boundaries that weren't even considered then, I think. And I think it would be difficult to respond in the same way. And I think that's one of the things that's difficult for museums, but particularly with objects relating to sex, is that sex is generally a private thing. And really the only evidence we have, particularly from kind of quite distant past cultures, are these artifacts. And it's difficult to know in a way how to interpret those, and how they would have been seen and understood, and how well they capture that private experience as it was lived then.
Absolutely.
And I think that's one of the things that's particularly difficult for museums. You know, it's in one sense, possibly sex hasn't changed a lot. You know, the mechanics are still basically the same. We haven't evolved physically to that extent. But in another sense, sex is about more than just the physical act. There's all the other baggage that goes with it. And that's one of the things that's quite kind of inaccessible, and trying to get access to that through artifacts, I think, is always going to be kind of problematic. I'm thinking of the example of sort of homosexuality as represented in ancient Greek objects, for example. There's a lot of objects that appear to show men in particular engaged in gay acts in some way. But from talking to academics when I was working on Greek collections in a museum, it seems that we need to be quite cautious about understanding that as being in any way equivalent to the way that we would understand gay relationships now. But if you just looked at the object and what they appear to show, then I think you would possibly misunderstand that.
Yeah, and I mean, this is true of anything, that we look at things with modern eyes, which, you know, like it's always going to be tough to put ourselves like, or, you know, to think of it the way that it would have been thought of then. Because ultimately we view everything through the lens of who we are today. So, but it's a really interesting point, isn't it? And I do find that very interesting. I do wonder if anyone, I mean, not people, because obviously people do, but if like institutions out there are collecting things like porn mags, or like, is there anything left of that? Or is it all like condemned to the recycling or the bin, or like that shed in the woods that no one goes into? It's just like, is that just where it ends up? Or is any of it ever saved? And I kind of fear for the ephemeral nature of these things in some ways, because I think that, yeah, sure, whilst in 50 years time, like it won't mean the same thing to the next person who looks to it, I still think there's a chance that it means something, or that it can be a part of someone's research, or, you know, like it can back something up. I don't know, I just feel like maybe maybe we just need to keep your sordid bits.
I have actually now 3 things to say just in response to what we've just been talking about. So firstly, a shed in the woods sounds like the most Swedish porn stash I've ever heard.
Accurate. Taken from my actual experiences. There was famously a shed in the wood where you could go and see some porn mags.
My second thing is, if we took, say in 200 years, just presented a top shelf, newsagent's top shelf porn selection, would the attitude to 1990s sex be considered private, or would it be considered public? And is that just that if you do have sexual objects or sex portrayed in object or art form, is it just assumed that then therefore that's a public thing that's acceptable? That interests me, and I don't think we actually have an answer for that. That's just a bit sort of
yeah.
And thanks. And the third thing is the most important is attitudes to LGBT sex and relationships. The representation of that is going to be really important to communities.
Yeah, huge
and
groups.
Understanding each other and themselves and all of that, as well as,
Yeah. And I mean, obviously,
being all accepting.
Obviously, now there's a huge drive to actually be inclusive of LGBT groups in museums, which is really good because we need to be represented. And I feel like that's a really positive movement. And also, shout out, there's a thing called Museum Pride now, which is just like museum professionals coming out. It's like, hello, we're out of the closet, which I thought was really nice.
I like that.
I saw them on Twitter. So, like, there are all these movements to make the LGBT community, more represented in collections and in our gallery spaces and all that stuff. And I think that's really important, and also on the staff side, obviously. But I feel like we have so far to go with that. Like,
so far.
But we've started it, and we need to get better. And please help us.
Yeah, I'd like to hear actually if anyone in the LGBT plus community as conservation or museums in general is listening to this thinking, oh yeah, and has an opinion about museum collections, or is familiar with collecting, or a collection that has been started, or whatever, or museums exhibitions that have been shown. I'd be really interested to hear, actually, because I don't feel very clued in or aware of what people's attitudes are to that.
Well, I mean, it's been tricky, right? So, slight story from me. So I've been trying to push that. Okay, maybe we should be collecting these stories. We can go out to the community and we can ask for stories, ask for objects, because it's a recognized, frankly, deficiency in our collection that we just don't have these stories. And then I feel like the attitude I've met has very much been one of, oh, well, maybe it's not a very big community. Maybe they don't want to. And it's like, well, I want to.
Why don't we ask?
So like, come on, guys, we could try.
You can't just assume disinterest.
Like everyone's free to say no, but there could also be a couple of yeses, and that would be a huge win. Like that would be better than like just silence. So I think there's just like a lot of like, we all who champion this, we must nag away at people and like just gently wear down the resistance.
Yeah. But then I wonder if there's also an attitude of LGBT plus communities just being like, well, it's not just about sex,
No, quite.
So I think
obviously
there's a delicate line to tread with.
There is
basically.
I mean, there is, because I was thinking, do I even want to bring up LGBT stuff in this episode, because it's about sexuality?
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously those are related, but like LGBT plus stuff is obviously so much more about love and relationships and how you live your life and equality, and it's so much more than doing it and who you do it with. It's so much more than that, right? So it's I feel like it deserves its own rainbow episode and not just be crammed into this as the last time we ever talk about it. It's not going to be the last time, don't worry.
Then I'm going to say that that I think says something really interesting about how our society views sex, and as that being at the moment really separate from love and relationships and the way you live your life and the impact or not that it has on your life.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much to examine there. That's a lot.
I want to jump to deterioration.
Oh, okay.
So I love plastics because I hate plastics. It's probably the context of modern materials for me. But the amount of objects in sexual collections from the last 50 years, that must be plastic and deteriorating hugely, like pleather instead of leather. What's happening with that?
Yeah, exactly.
What are we doing? How does latex deteriorate? Yeah. Chlorinated latex is something that I've only just found out about. What does that do, guys? Maybe we should look it up.
Yeah, exactly. So that's, I mean, and this kind of straddles the line of BDSM culture and also fashion, where like a lot of these interesting latex, PVC, leather materials are used in clothing, in outfits, and that sort of thing, which is fashion, but of a very particular type. That must cause so many headaches for people. I mean, latex is notoriously poorly behaved. Yeah. It's like the worst thing. And yet it's very highly coveted in BDSM circles. And like that's going to be such a pickle for someone, I feel.
I wonder who's collecting this stuff.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear if anyone knows of this sort of object. Like, I'm thinking like outfits and sex toys and, you know, that sort of thing. Basically anything in the back half of Anne Summers.
Yeah, I was going to say anything you can find in Anne Summers.
Deteriorate well, is what I'm saying. It cannot do well in terms of...
Yeah.
You've also given me the horrible idea of whether we should treat these as working objects.
That made that very interesting.
Explain.
Do I really need to go into details?
I think once it ends up in a museum, it's no longer a working object in that sense.
Okay,
or at least,
I'm thinking like battery-powered vibrators and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, it's not going to perform that very well.
Why would we see that in any different respect to, say, a battery-operated robot or something?
Yeah, no.
Or remote control car? Because we wouldn't keep the batteries...
Well, okay, so sometimes in musical instrument museums, the instruments are maintained in working order so they can occasionally be played.
Agreed. Yes. Okay, yeah, I see.
Yeah, no, I do see the point.
So
and
I think it probably is in a slightly different category.
Yeah, but I do see what you mean, because some of these are, you know, much more technically advanced than just vibrating.
On and off.
No, I'm just thinking of the ones that wiggle around and, you know, like, I don't know, have you ever been to an Anne Summers party? Because, wow, they do a lot of stuff.
I haven't, actually.
They do a lot of stuff.
I feel like this should have been pre-research for this episode.
You will have a very suspect search history. Don't do it. But yeah, like obviously there are some fairly advanced stuff out there. But I feel like then like you should maybe take this as there must be a different way of maybe preserving that. Like just do a little video of it while it's still going, and then you know you have to keep that with the object record file and just be like, well, this is what it would have done when it worked.
I just had this is not related,
not in use, just like as a demonstration, like not with a person.
Not accompanied.
No, not accompanied.
One of the things that came to mind when I was looking for sort of examples of stuff in museums, and I found a short film by a man called Isaac Julian about called The Attendant, which was about the erotic fantasies of an attendant in a museum late at night when he's looking at a painting. I haven't actually seen the film, I should say. I meant to track it down on YouTube and see it, but I haven't. And one of the points is that the attendant is black and the young man he's fantasizing about is white. And I think reading reviews about it, it makes links between the kind of BDSM fantasies that he's having and the history of slavery of black people by white people, which is represented in this painting and so on. But apparently overlooking this is a conservator, or listening approvingly, it says. I'm not quite sure how the approval is conveyed, but that's what the New York Times said. Listening approvingly is a conservator who's working on frames and so on. And I thought that was interesting that he felt the need to put the conservator in there. Yeah. I was wondering why a conservator, because they're not the kind of first person that people tend to think about.
Curator.
About museum personnel. And I wondered if it was something to do with the way that conservators look at stuff a lot. So having a figure who's quite kind of passive but is looking at things, is an onlooker, is quite a kind of conservator kind of role. And then I wondered if it was also to do with the way that conservators are often the only people who are allowed to touch objects. And then we have that very privileged position of understanding the objects in a way that others don't, and we get to feel them. There's that whole kind of sensuality about the tactility of the object. We feel what the texture feels like. Is this object cool or warm or rough or smooth, or how does it feel? What's the weight? And I think that gives you quite a different relationship to objects from the kind of relationship you can have if you're only looking at them. And I think this is possibly a bit of a stretch for the kind of smut episode, but I just wanted to say something about how people often find objects in themselves sensual, not necessarily sexual, but they're
I think that's a really nice way of thinking about it.
Yeah. Today I'm reviewing a book called On Sexuality, Collecting Everybody's Experience, which was published in 2015 by Museums, etc. It's a short volume of 5 essays surrounding the topic of sexuality in museums. The first chapter is called Let's Talk About Sexuality, Exhibiting LGBTQ Voices, and its author Sean Curran takes us on a journey through a number of successful exhibitions on the topic. It's really refreshing to read about how both big and small museums across the UK have been creating LGBTQ exhibitions in recent years. But the author doesn't shy away from saying that interpreting objects as queer is a difficult task. Instead, the power of oral histories is highlighted. This chapter is peppered with good practice examples and constructive advice for people to take away. This is followed by a very brief chapter called Collecting a Drag King Ensemble by Jill Austin. It follows the journey of a donation into a Chicago museum collection. Many museum professionals will already be familiar with how museums collect, how donations are sought, how they are approved, and how collection policies and exhibition programs factor into these processes. So this chapter seems to be aimed at a non-museum audience in a way. Next is a chapter dedicated to a museum. Amoroteket, a museum of sexology, by Stine Katrin Schyle Hansen. This reads as a marketing pamphlet for the museum and its purpose initially, but soon delves into a more in-depth discussion when talking about how museums can address big issues in society, like sexual assaults and the importance of consent, and foster body positivity in people of all ages. Following this is Contagious, the Effective Politics of AIDS and Scrapbooks by Katrin Kuppert, which explores the medium of scrapbooks as a way of displaying and recording personal journeys with HIV. This is a powerful chapter about the power of freeform art and how archival collections can help highlight stories closely related to sexuality. The final essay in this anthology is by Stephanie Snyder and is entitled This Book Was Made for Lesbians, The Possibilities of Visualizing Community in Lesbian Photo Albums. Again, this examines the importance of archival material in making a hidden subculture a little more visible. This chapter examines the links between photography as art, lesbian identity building, and the importance of being seen. I really like that this book addresses issues like lumping LGBTQ people together. I get that we've claimed that group label, but we actually encompass a very varied group of communities within that designation. You're not collecting a homogeneous group of stories from us. In fact, it's a bit more of a jumble, but ultimately I suppose that's true of any group of people. I do, however, feel like this publication is a little abrupt. I would have liked an introduction and a conclusion, or even just an editorial summary at the end. It's a good set of essays, but they don't seem very tied together, and I feel like a strong editorial voice would have helped with that. That being said, the content is good, and certainly provides food for thought for museum professionals wishing to expand their collecting, to include both LGBTQ and straight content of a more sexual nature. This book is 140 pages long with colour illustrations. If you'd like to buy this book, you can purchase it for £25 straight, pardon the pun, from the publisher. That price includes worldwide shipping, so that's a bit of a bargain.
Dear Jane, what do you do when your professional confidence has hit rock bottom? Without going into excruciating detail, I feel pretty down at work right now, and the feeling of rubbishness has become a feeling of I'm not good at my job. But how do I get out of that rut? Any advice was much appreciated. I hate feeling like this, but I can't seem to shake it. Dear Anonymous, thank you very much for your question. The question that you ask is such an important question. We all know it even has a title, Imposter Syndrome. The sense that you've got yourself in a position that's far better than you can actually deliver and that you're really not good enough to do the job. Well, my first thought is I think it's very unlikely that this is actually true. So it might be possible that you can check in with a colleague, someone you've trusted and known for a long time, and just ask them to look at some of your work. But to be honest with you, I don't think that the answer to imposter syndrome is really about whether or not you're good enough at the job. It's really about how you're feeling about your job and how you're evaluating yourself. Now, for some people, a sense of dread going to work, a sense of not feeling competent, is a sign of a far greater problems in terms of their own mental health. And if it's affecting any of you listeners, go and get help. Sometimes it's hard to go and ask for medical help for mental health problems, but it's something which we should all be getting more comfortable with and more confident to do, because our brain and our emotions are as much a part of us as breaking a toe or a finger. And it's incredibly important that we feel that we can ask for help. I think that really leads me into the next part of the problem. Why not ask for help? Why not ask your friends and family and network for a little bit of validation? It may seem like an unusual thing, certainly not very British for some of our British listeners, but seeking support and validation from your friends and your peers is something I'm sure that they'd be very happy to do. Perhaps even just ask them about an example of when they've seen you do something that they've been impressed about. Social media doesn't all have to be about people arguing about the political issues of the day. It can be used for good. Sometimes this sense of low self-worth stems from the behaviour of a colleague or someone who you're working with or you know, who's deliberately or thoughtlessly undermining you with this constant series of criticisms, or perhaps leaving you out of important decisions, or just always talking your role down as if it's less important. But try to think about that. Is there someone in your life who's bringing negativity and unhappiness to your life? Because if they are, I know it's incredibly hard to block them out, but try to remember that their ability to hurt you and to drag you down can only really get to you if you let them get inside your head. Obviously, if someone's manoeuvring in a position in a workplace situation that's unprofessional or unfortunate, think about whether you can go to your trade union or any other way to get around them. But remember, if what they're doing is belittling you and talking you down, then there's a very good chance that that stems from their own inadequacies and their own inabilities. And try to perhaps give less energy to their negative thoughts and give more energy to your positive thoughts. So that really then means, well, let's think about how you foreground some positive thoughts into your day. Perhaps at the end of every day, think about something that you've achieved. Have a diary and just write down the thing I've been proudest of today, or the thing that I've learned today. Write it down, and if you're really feeling super good, try telling it to someone. When you get home, if there's someone there for you to talk to, just tell them, or share a little Instagram photograph of something you've done, or just tell someone incidentally in work in the coffee break, I've just really been pleased with the piece of work that I've done today. Make a habit of speaking the positive, and the positive will come to you. And while you're doing that, why not pass on a compliment to someone else that you know, someone else that you meet, whether it's a complete stranger who you just admire the amazing combination of their shoes and their handbag, or whether it's a professional colleague who you say, that was an incredibly difficult situation and I thought you handled it really well and professionally. It's amazing how much you can pass on that happiness and perhaps be the centre of a slightly more positive perspective on the world. You might find that some refresher training helps boost your confidence. Sometimes I know when I go on a course and I think, oh yeah, I do know that, I did know that, I do feel better from doing that. And that doesn't have to cost money. There is loads of useful online training that you can tap into. And perhaps go and train on something a little bit different, a TED talk or something that just stretches you in another area. So if you're having problems talking, seek out some of the communication advice stuff or something like that. Take yourself on a little free course that you get a certificate with at the end, just so you can see that you can achieve things and you can do things. And I would really end by saying that the one thing about imposter syndrome, that perhaps the only good thing about imposter syndrome is one of its worst qualities, is just how many of us suffer from it. If you mention that you're feeling like you can't do your job properly and you talk to some of your friends or colleagues or family about it, you'll be surprised how many people come straight back to you saying that, oh, I feel that I can't do this thing very well, or I'm not very good at that. And perhaps by looking at the massive contrast between their perception of themselves and their actual abilities in your eyes, you'll begin to see that, and be able to focus on the fact that this is not a real reflection of what you're actually able to do, just about how you're valued and how society maybe teaches you about not being confident about your values and things like that. So I think really to sum it up, if this is overwhelming, if this is making you feel nauseous when you approach your work, if your sleep is deeply disturbed, if you're feeling panic attacks, then this is a medical thing. It should be taken incredibly seriously. If this is one of those day-to-day draining things, then look for the positives. Be that positive person in your workplace. Be the person who offers the positive feedback. And I'm sure it will come back to you as well. Over and out.
Good morning, Jenny. You're in my house. Welcome.
I'm tired. Thank
We're
you.
sitting at the breakfast table, and there's cats around that will probably make some noises, which will be adorable.
They are excellent cats, though.
They are really good cats. And you're looking, mighty sprightly for the week you've had.
Hey, thanks.
You've been this week at the Museums Association conference, haven't you?
I have.
In
rather.
Belfast.
Yeah. So first time in Belfast, and obviously Icon's conference is going to be there next year.
Very excited.
Now I know where I'm going, which is also good. It's a very confusing building, the Belfast waterfront, because it's got so many different levels and loads of different little stairs to go off into different bits. So depending on how huge the Icon conference is going to be, it's going to be really interesting trying to navigate around all the different areas.
It'll be fine.
It'll be fine. Absolutely. I'm sure they're going to have loads of volunteers who can point us in the right direction. So it'll be absolutely fine. Yeah, no, it was really good. I learned loads of things.
Good.
I've got so much stuff to tell everyone, back at the museum and in the region about stuff I've learned. So that's really good.
Good. And I understand there were some smut relevant things that you've learned and talks you've seen.
Absolutely. So something that the Museums Association does every year at the conference, well, I don't know exactly how long they've been doing this, but they do it every year as far as I'm concerned, is the Festival of Change. And that tends to be slightly more provocative and creative interventions. Some of them were really good this year. One of them was called Is Your Vagina Normal?
Oh,
Which, is amazing. And it was presented by the Vagina Museum.
There's a what?
Oh, yes.
Where is it?
No, right. So this, at the moment, they don't have a permanent location.
Right. Okay.
So they're a travelling museum.
Oh, brilliant.
But it's a fabulous idea. So it's just, they collect anything that's gynecological.
I see.
Anything like that. And basically there is my vagina normal thing is something that they go out and do at schools and stuff. To just kind of, talk to girls about, whatever you have, it's fine.
Yeah. Probably normal.
Yeah. It's that is fine. Don't worry about it. Which I love as a concept.
Yeah.
But then I would as a Swede, because we already do that sort of thing in schools.
You're kind of open about that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, you gotta teach young people about their bodies and stuff.
Well, not in Britain. In this country, we pretend we don't have bodies.
Oh, yes. You go for the Victorian approach of,
yes.
Oh my God, a flash of ankle. But no, it was fabulous. And I did tell them that I was going to talk about them on the show, because I was good. I need to tell people about this. It's fabulous. So I don't know what the plan is, if they're going to ever have a permanent location or anything. But if you ever see a pop-up exhibition with them or anything, definitely go. They had some fabulous artwork and all that stuff. There was also something called the Museum of Femininity, which I quite liked. I was drawn in because they had postcards with knitted boobs on them, which is instantly a win for me. Just a knitted boob. But yeah, so it's they describe themselves as a daring interactive museum where visitors will be allowed to handle objects that signify aspects of womanhood typically perceived as taboo or disgusting. So one of the things that I looked at in one of their boxes, I think the box was called something like Insert Me.
Of course.
And it was a fake bloody tampon. It's a real tampon, but the blood is fake. That was used in protests and stuff recently. And they had a lot of these sorts of things around where they had stuff that had been used for protests and all that stuff. And apparently they do a podcast. So if I find that, I'll pop a link to that in the show notes. So I got very excited because A, talking to other podcasters, and B, oh my God, tampons. They had so many good things. So they had Museums Are Drag, which featured drag queens.
Oh, great.
And also one of the activities for that was that you had paper cutouts of people, and you could essentially color in and draw your museum as if it was in drag, which was an interesting challenge. I just thought it was an interesting concept to think about, what your museum would look like as a drag queen. I loved it. I loved it. It was great. Apparently there was a drag show as well, in the evening, but I was too knackered. I couldn't go. There was so many good things going on, but those are the things that were relevant to the Smut episode, I think, which was fabulous.
Great review.
God, I need a nap now, though.
Do you want some more toast?
Oh, yes, please. And some tea. Now we're talking. If you're enjoying the C Word and would like to support our work, then please consider becoming one of our patrons. For as little as $1 per month, you can help us keep our episodes online and more of them coming. Patreon helps us meet our regular costs for the show, and also to plan ahead so we know roughly how much of a monthly budget we've got. That's super helpful when you're trying to do something special like buy a better microphone or save up to go to a special event. Your support also helps keep us free of advertisements. In return, our supporters get access to our archive of extended episodes, which you can only access on our Patreon page. Yeah, for that $1 a month, you get a little extra audio enjoyment. We've crunched the numbers, and it's about 10% extra content on a regular basis. Well, that's not bad for less than a cup of coffee, eh? If supporting us sounds like something you'd like to do, then head over to patreon.com/thecword and join our bunch of absolute champions. Thanks for listening. We're The C Word, and you've been listening to Christina Rosaic, Chloe Rumsey, and me, Jenny Mathiasen. Join us next time for an episode about tools. In the meantime, check out our website at thecword.show, tweet us at thecwordpodcast, or simply email us on thecwordpodcast@gmail.com. The intro and outro music is Spring by Didi Music, used under Creative Commons Attribution License. Additional music and sound effects by Callum Robertson. This has been a Wooden Dice production.